Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker shills, debt slaves, serfs, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, student debt slaves. I'm a useful idiot, and this is part two of a video I just posted about student loan debt forgiveness. It turned into a part two because for some reason YouTube mysteriously cut off my video at 20 minutes. But I had some more important things I wanted to say. One of the things I wanted to point out is that one of the things that we really need to factor into all this is inflation. And a good example of that is in 1964, in 1965, the Higher Education Act was enacted, and that's when a lot of the Pell Grant programs and all these student loan programs started out. And in 1964, the average tuition for a quarter was $248. But by 2007, 40 years later, tuition per quarter is $8,000. And I know for a fact that I went to the University of Washington. I ended up with 2 degrees. I started there in 1976, and I returned in 1983. And I worked full time, and I also went to school full time. I was carrying a full load, 4 classes every morning, and working 40 hours a week. And but I took out, I got a Pell Grant for a small amount. I think it was about $2,000, and I took out I think a $10,000 loan or something like that. And it took me 10 years, but my payments were only $10 a month. But I paid off my student debt loan, and it was pretty manageable. But the fact is also that people used to get degrees that were applicable, although both of my degrees in art history and Germanics turned out to be useless. I ended up being a chef for 30 some odd years. But now, over the last 10, 20, 30 years, we've had an explosion of liberal arts degrees. And, that has caused a lot of the student debt problems because they end up getting jobs as social workers and teachers and theorists and that sort of thing. And they don't generate much money, but they still take on huge debt. And right now we're at what is it, a 30 to 40% default rate. So not only are students ladled with all this debt they can't pay, and they're defaulting at high rates, and then of course inflation factored in there. It's just really quite a mess. But some of the other things I wanted to go into too were one of the other bombs that's going to hit people that get loan debt forgiveness is people, particularly over 60. There's been an explosion of people over 60 taking on student debt, and one of the bombs they're going to have to face is that when they get their student debt loans forgiven, it's considered an asset, and they could end up having their Social Security benefits reduced by up to $2,500 a year. So that's something for seniors who take student loan debt to consider. And I had 3 more points I wanted to make, and so apparently this is going to be a very long video. But here in part two, I want to bring up the fact that one of the things that's really striking to me is that we have these students supposedly going through higher education, 4 years of college, 6 years of college, maybe more, and they don't grasp the basics of finance and economics and the nature of debt. And so a lot of these students just think, oh, great, the debt's going to go away, and it just disappears. And it doesn't matter, the government can afford it, and the government has the power to make this stuff disappear. But no, those debts have to be paid, and they will be paid, and this money gets pushed onto the government, and the Federal Reserve prints up money out of nowhere, the government borrows, and so the students' idea and ignorance of the fact that this debt doesn't just magically go away. Somebody has to pay it. As I mentioned in part one, it's going to be the taxpayers. The taxpayers are going to pay for all these student loans. And one of the points I wanted to make that I'm making now is a personal experience. I have a friend, or somewhat of a friend, who never worked a day in her life. She's 60 years old. She recently got a job in the last 2 years because she was married or had a boyfriend for the last 30 years. And so she didn't really have to work. She has to work now. But she never worked a day in her life, certainly not in the United States, and boasts about never having filed a tax return ever in her life. So she's never had a job. She's never filed for any taxes. She lived in Europe for about 20 plus years, so wasn't even in this country. But then she came back to this country and she qualified for Social Security benefits. And so she gets paid Social Security benefits, having never filed a tax return and never having worked. So I was really struck by that. I found out later that she more likely qualified to get Social Security benefits through her former marriages. So, but it just seemed weird that you never worked and never paid any taxes, and yet never certainly never paid into the Social Security system, but now you get Social Security money. And then on top of that, she's now working, but she works as a private contractor and gets paid under the table. So she continues to not pay any taxes. And then she double dips because she gets the Social Security money and then she gets paid for a job as well. And the IRS and the government won't catch her because it's under the table. So she gets to double dip there. And then the ultimate irony, and this is how it ties in with this story, she went to college in Oregon and got a theater arts degree, and she's $50,000 in debt, and she's very happy about the fact that she has $50,000 in debt, and boasts about the fact that she's never paid a dime paying back her student loan debt at all. Never had to pay any of it, and of course she has a